Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. I think we can start. If you have colleagues that are coming in late, maybe you can advise them to check out the recording of this webinar through EnGenius Academy. So today I'll be discussing about optimizing Wi-Fi performance. But actually, the topics are more on the common questions in terms of Wi-Fi setup, as well as some best practices that you can do in terms of designing or deploying Wi-Fi devices. So these are the commonly asked questions in terms of Wi-Fi. I'll be going through them one by one, show you the user interface for some of the functions as well. If you have any questions, please type it on chat, or you can use the Q&A function on Zoom as well. So for the topics I'll be covering, commonly asked questions are: how do we transition from Wi-Fi 4, 5 to Wi-Fi 6? Like, are there any special requirements, any special things that you need to take note of? Behavior of legacy clients in Wi-Fi 6 networks, because nowadays a lot of people are starting to deploy Wi-Fi 6, and some client devices may not be compatible. So what do you need to take note of? Fast roaming, how does it work? Client balancing in high density Wi-Fi usage, what can we do about it? Dynamic client selection, dynamic channel selection. There's a typo right here. Band steering, DFS or dynamic frequency selection, spectrum analyzer, as well as EnGenius Academy. So transitioning from Wi-Fi 4 or 5 to Wi-Fi 6. So actually, in terms of compatibility, there should be no issue, especially if the devices are up to date. The only thing that you need to take note of when upgrading the devices of the client side from Wi-Fi 4 or 5 to 6 is the transmit power. So most of the time, in most cases, Wi-Fi 4 or Wi-Fi 5 devices have higher transmit power than Wi-Fi 6. For instance, if a Wi-Fi 4 access point can deliver 29 dBm of power, maybe the Wi-Fi 6 AP can only deliver 23 or 24, 26, depending on the model. So that's one thing to take note of when you're deploying Wi-Fi. So basically, wait, let me jump to the user interface. Yeah, so basically for transmit power adjustments, if you already know the maximum transmit power of your AP, you just have to head over to access point and then go to radio. This would show you the target transmit power. So this would define what the maximum transmit power is for your deployment. So we have individual radio settings for 2.4, 5 gig. If you're using a 6 gigahertz band radio, you can adjust that as well. And then we have a separate option as well for outdoors. So of course, for transmit power, the higher the transmit power, the longer the range or the wider the range. So if your access point in the past can deliver 29 dBm of power, maybe you already did channel planning on the original deployment, or maybe this is the existing deployment of the client. If transitioning to Wi-Fi 6 and the access point's maximum transmit power is only 23 dBm, then you may have some dead spots there or weaker signal in some areas. So that's one thing to take note of when deploying Wi-Fi 6 devices. From the access point side, you can also individually change the transmit power for each of the AP. You can do this on the AP page or from the individual AP details page. So from here, you can override the settings. So for instance, the transmit power set on the radio settings globally is 17 dBm. I can still adjust it per AP. So like the ECW336 maximum transmit power is 23 dBm. You might want to check if it's the number of APs that you have is enough to cover the range of the whole site. There are other tools that we have on the cloud that can help you check your coverage. Of course, one of that is the floor plan view, in which you can generate a heat map to see the overall coverage of your device. If you want to upgrade the system and you don't have the device on hand, you can also plot a virtual access point from here. So all our models on the cloud would be displayed here so that you can compare the differences in terms of the coverage of the AP. By the way, the heat map function, this antenna propagation that's on my page right now is actually part of our Pro license package. But if you have a new access point, every time you register a new device, it comes with a 1-year pro license. So this applies to all our cloud devices. Excuse me. Next topic, behavior of legacy clients in Wi-Fi 6 networks. So I mentioned earlier that Wi-Fi 4 and Wi-Fi 5 devices, 802.11ac and maybe 802.11g as well, and AC Wave 2 have no issues in terms of compatibility for Wi-Fi 6. But some client devices, maybe older generation, maybe 802.11b or 802.11a, may have issues in terms of connecting to the radio. Because these devices may no longer be updated in terms of the driver side and the operating system as well. We encountered one issue wherein a Windows 7 laptop had an 802.11, I think it was a B or A wireless adapter attached to it. So this laptop cannot see the SSID. So in order to go around that issue is you have to disable Wi-Fi 6 on one of your radios, so most likely 2.4. So the reason behind is that when a client device goes into a space where you have an access point, the client device usually sends a beacon to the environment. So it does this to scan if there is an AP that it can connect to. So if it detects an access point, it's going to send out a message, and then the AP will receive that, and in response, the AP would reply with details such as the SSID, the password, the type of connection, the data rate, etc. So if the client device is not updated to support Wi-Fi 6, let's say the driver is very old or outdated, what's going to happen is that the AP will still respond to that client's request, but then the client would not be able to decipher that information because of incompatibility on the driver side. So if you have any issues wherein you deploy Wi-Fi 6 but some client devices cannot see the SSID at all, try to disable Wi-Fi 6 on one of your radios, 2.4, because most likely legacy clients only support 2.4. And then from there, most likely your client device would already see the SSID. So apart from that, that's the only thing that you need to take note of. Basically, if the driver still has an updated version, try to update it first to see if it's compatible with Wi-Fi 6. Otherwise, if it's already using the latest version available on the web, then there's no choice there but to disable Wi-Fi 6 on 2.4. Okay, another common question or misconception is fast roaming. So a lot of clients mistakenly mix fast roaming and mesh. So we have fast roaming, which basically allows your client devices, sorry, let me move this window, which allows your client devices to seamlessly move from one AP to another. Let's say it's a multi-AP deployment. Maybe it's a function room or it's an office environment wherein you have multiple APs. So if you're moving between access points, let's say you're on Skype or maybe you're on a WhatsApp call, so your call should continue. For fast roaming to work, there are a couple of requirements. One is 802.11r, another one is 802.11k. So these are fast roaming standards that are mostly supported by mobile devices. For laptops, not all laptops support it. For example, Windows 10, I think there are only a number of devices that support fast roaming, or 802.11r and k. For Macs, so long as it has an M1 or M2 chip, it supports fast roaming. But if it's using an Intel adapter or an Intel CPU, most likely it does not support fast roaming by default. But on the mobile phones, tablets, most likely it would support fast roaming. So basically, if you want to test fast roaming, there are a couple of requirements apart from the device supporting 802.11r and k. Another one is that the device should have no dead spots in between. Meaning between your access points, let's say AP1 and 2, there should be no dead spot here. Because if you're trying to roam between APs, your AP should be able to communicate to the other side. The client should be able to see both APs. If there is a dead spot, basically that will drop your connection. There would be no seamless transfer already. So that's the other requirement in order to do fast roaming. So again, in order to check if the client device supports 802.11r and k, usually the device manufacturer would list that out under the wireless adapter spec list. For Apple, they have a dedicated page to tell you which specific devices support fast roaming in their product lineup. So if you're testing using a Windows laptop, if it's running Windows 10, most likely it does not support roaming. If it's running Windows 11, it may support roaming, but double check on the adapter compatibility list. If you're using Samsung, Android, or any other Android phones or tablets, most likely it does support roaming. So if you want to test roaming, if it's really like seamlessly transitioning from one AP to another, you can open up maybe WhatsApp or Skype and then run the call as you move around AP to AP. So I mentioned that a lot of people get confused between fast roaming and mesh. So mesh, I don't have a slide for that, but let me just show you how to activate it from the UI. Basically what mesh does is it allows you to link access points together via the wireless side. So usually when you deploy an access point, you're going to have to wire all your APs back to a switch. So for mesh to function, so what mesh would do is that if, let's say, you have an access point that is impossible to run a cable back to the switch, what you can do is enable mesh. And then from there, you can power up an access point using maybe an injector or a power adapter. To get data back to the source, let's say to your internet, you can link it through wireless with the AP that's wired to it. So all you need to do from the local interface is basically hit auto pair once mesh is enabled, and then the access points will talk to each other to link. So what mesh does is basically connect to another access point to get data from your main router or main internet source. The common misconception with fast roaming is that people think that if you use mesh, that would have all your SSIDs use the same SSID, have the same password, and you can seamlessly roam from one AP to another. So that's fast roaming. So you can enable fast roaming without enabling mesh. So if you have all your APs wired, you don't need to enable mesh. Fast roaming is enough if you want seamless transfer. But if you have devices that you cannot wire back to the switch, then you're going to need mesh to link the AP to another access point. So client balancing is a feature we added maybe about the first quarter of this year. So what client balancing does is it would balance out the clients on your access point in a multi-AP deployment. Usually we use client balancing in a public hotspot deployment or in an environment where there are a lot of clients in the area. So imagine a ballroom, function room, exhibition center where you have maybe 20, 30, or 40 access points. So if all the clients are concentrated on a single area of that venue, then they may be connecting to 1, 2, or 3 access points because that's the nearest AP. So that's the usual what do you call this? That's what the client device would usually do. They would stick to an access point that's closest to them. They would connect there. So with client balancing, to avoid 1, 2, or 3 APs being overloaded by this number of clients, the AP would spread out those clients evenly in the area. So usually in the ballroom, function room, if you're deploying APs, they would be nearby each other to accommodate the density in the environment, the number of users. So client balancing would spread those clients out automatically on those other APs. But I would not recommend this option to be enabled in environments wherein you need a dedicated connection. Because when you enable client balancing and then the client switches to another access point, depending on the client device, some may have seamless experience while some other devices may have drops. So that means as they move from one AP to another, if they don't support like 802.11r or K or V, like the roaming standards, then they would drop their connection before connecting to the next available AP. So to make it safe, I would suggest enabling client balancing in public environments, public hotspots, in spaces where they just need internet access, but not a dedicated line, such as office environments wherein they're using VoIP, data-specific applications that needs to be constantly connected to the internet. So office environments, schools, I would advise not to enable client balancing. Maybe in office environments, if you're using it for guest connections, that's fine. But if you're using it for like dedicated internet connection, wherein all the applications that you use rely 24/7 connection to the internet, then please don't enable client balancing. So it's only for public spaces wherein you want to spread your clients into multiple APs. Another name for client balancing, by the way, is load balancing. So DCS, or dynamic channel selection, we added this roughly on the first or second quarter of this year as well. You can find the option under the radio settings too. So that would be configure and then access point and then head over to radio. So what DCS is basically it would allow your access point to switch to another channel if it feels or it detects that there is much interference on the specific channel it's on. So this is a bit different from the auto channel option that's predetermined here on top. What auto channel would do is about the same thing. So at the start of the device, when it boots up or when you first power it on, it's going to scan the environment. So from there, it's going to assess which channel is least occupied, is less noisy, and which is less used in terms of multiple APs in the same location. So for instance, right now, the AP detects that channel 1 is less noisy. After an hour, you would have, let's say you get more noise in channel 1, your AP will not switch anymore. So it's only going to switch on boot up or on reboot. Now, for AP to constantly check and switch to different channels if there are noise issues that occur, then you can enable DCS. For DCS, there are two modes. So one is interval, the other one is schedule. So interval is you can set out a specific time interval, let's say 15 minutes or 1 hour, wherein the AP would scan the environment and switch to a different channel whenever it detects noise. This is important to take note of because when your AP decides to switch to a different channel, it would disconnect the current clients before it switches to the next best channel. Now, to avoid the issues in terms of disconnection, but you still want your AP to automatically scan the environment and switch to the best channel available, you can set out time intervals. Maybe the first interval is during lunch hours wherein nobody's using it, depending on your environment. If it's an office environment and everyone goes off at 12 p.m., maybe you can set one at 12 and then set another one after office hours, like maybe 8 p.m. or 12 a.m., wherein it will only scan the environment for noise and switch to a different channel on the set time that you set. So that's what DCS does. Basically, it automates auto channeling and it makes it a lot easier to deploy on a noisy environment. Basically, it will let your AP decide when to switch. But again, take note of your setting because every time your AP would switch to a different channel, it would kick out your clients before it can change to the next best available channel. So DCS can be applied to both 2.4 and 5 gig. For 5 gig, you get an additional option, which is exclude DFS. So basically, if it runs DCS or dynamic channel selection, you can exclude the DFS channels from the selection. So I'll go over DFS in a while. Okay, so DCS enhancement, I have this slide because when we released DCS, we only had an enable disable option. So we have added additional options as well so that you can customize when your AP would do the scan, what interval, and what time frame. Okay, so band steering. Band steering is similar to client balancing, wherein the AP would switch the client to a different radio. But specifically for band steering, it manages the client between two radios, 2.4 and 5 gig. So to enable band steering, it's on your SSID profile. The main requirement is that you have to have both radios enabled, 2.4 and 5 gig. So band steering can be found on the bottom of the SSID profile page under advanced settings. You have an enable disable option here and you can set the RSSI value. So I would always recommend -80. So how band steering would work is, by default, all client devices would just connect to an SSID, the strongest signal. If you have band steering enabled, most likely the devices would connect to 2.4 if you just leave your settings at default, because 2.4 has a wider range as compared to 5 gig. If you enable band steering, it will always prioritize the 5 GHz radio meaning dual band clients would always connect to 5 gig first to have better connection, better speed, better data rate as well, because band steering has wider channel selections as well as faster data rates. So your clients would have better connection on 5 gig, plus you're most likely to have less interference as well. Now, you have this RSSI threshold option so that if, for example, you're going away from the access point and your signal is starting to drop on 5 gig, your AP would then push you to 2.4 because maybe you would have still a stronger signal on 2.4 as compared to your current state at 5 gig. So that means if the client moves away from the radio, it will then connect to the 2.4 gigahertz radio. Excuse me. So I would always recommend to enable band steering on any deployment. RSSI threshold, you can leave this at -80. So for band steering, again, the radio must have 2.4 and 5 gig enabled for both. On the client side, when they scan the SSID, let's say you open your wireless names, you would only see one single SSID here. And then the system would decide whether to push the client to 2.4 or 5 gig, depending on the conditions. If he is below or within the threshold of -80, then he will put the client at 5 gigahertz. If it's less than that, then it will push the client to 2.4. Okay, so DFS. DFS means dynamic frequency selection. All devices have this enabled by default. So if we look at the 5 gigahertz spectrum, we have channels 36 up to 165. It would depend per region. Some regions have some channels on 5 gigahertz reserved for specific use. Maybe the government uses it for military purposes or something. But for all countries, there is a middle band here, which falls under the DFS spectrum. Now, DFS channels 52 to 144 is actually shared with other equipment, such as radar equipment and weather equipment. Now, what happens is, let's say if you deploy an outdoor access point, and then you set it to maybe channel 120. So if your AP is broadcasting right now, and then after a while, it detects a weather equipment nearby, or a radar equipment, what the AP will do is go into standby mode. So it depends whether it's on, the standby is 1 minute or 10 minutes. Now, during that standby mode, your AP will just basically wait. So all the data will be stalled. No data can pass through until after 1 minute or 10 minutes, depending on the conditions. Now, to avoid that issue, we have zero-weight DFS. Zero-weight DFS is available on our security APs, so that would be the ECW230S and ECW220S. What it would do is, because it has a dedicated scanning radio, it would constantly scan the background for DFS frequency. If it detects, for example, a radar signal nearby, even if it's not broadcasting, it's just detecting it, then it's going to switch your AP to another channel right away. So this would allow the AP to avoid that 1 minute or 10-minute wait and reduce the downtime. So in the future, we'll be adding more and more devices that support zero-weight DFS. So that means we'll be adding more devices that has a scanning radio in the future, especially for outdoors. So DFS is most likely affected by outdoor deployments, but it can also be affected indoors if you are deploying near military bases, airports, and seaports as well. Basically, any facility that's near a radar or weather equipment. On the user interface, to toggle zero-weight DFS, you have to go to access point and then radio settings. So one option you can do is, if you enable DCS, excuse me, if you enable DCS, you can exclude the DFS channels. If you have a security AP, you can enable zero-weight DFS. So here you can also check which models are supported. The more APs that we add that support zero-weight DFS, we will add that here as well on the tooltip. Excuse me. So we also have a spectrum analyzer built in on our models with a dedicated scanning radio. The spectrum analyzer is actually very useful in determining the amount of noise in the area. So through the spectrum analyzer, you can scan on both 2.4 and 5 gig to check what best channel you can select on a given space. So for example, here in this GIF file, you can see that channel 8 and channel, I think this is about 13 here, is pretty much occupied with a bit of boost here in channel 1 by other access points nearby. So here you have your waterfall graph on the bottom, so you can see that channels 7 to 8 is pretty noisy. Between channels 12 to 13 is also very noisy. So what I would do in this setup is basically select a channel that does not overlap between these. So maybe I can select channel 1 and I can still select maybe channel 11 on the safe side. So you can use this in terms of doing ocular inspection, site survey, or adjusting noise on the fly, so that you can have your AP switch to another channel if you're setting it up manually. Let me just show you how that works. Let me jump to an access point that has the dedicated scanning radio. Just a moment. So the spectrum analyzer is part of the diagnostic tools. You can only see this tab if you're using a security AP, so those that end with an S model. Currently we have it on the ECW220S and ECW230S. If you go to Spectrum and click on Activate, you can select either 2.4 or 5 gig. So this will not disrupt your current connection because this is a dedicated radio where it's running on. So if you have clients connected on the other radios of the same AP, they would not get interrupted. So like right now, I can see channels between channels 12 and 13 is very noisy here. So I would not set my AP on this channel. I can see that between 7 and 8 and 2 and 3 it's also very noisy here. So you can use this data when doing site survey if you don't have any external equipment. Maybe you don't have any handheld device that can do a scan for you, so you can utilize the access points in doing that as well. For 5 gigahertz, it's usually very quiet unless there are a lot of 5 gigahertz radios nearby. So let's try to run the test now. I'm not seeing any activity at all. Let me refresh my connection. Let me try again. Okay, there we go. Okay, so excuse me. So I guess the area where I'm situated at right now have a lot of noise in terms of the 5 gigahertz signal. I'm seeing strong noise right here on 52 to 64, as well as a bit of burst under 120 to 124. I'm living near a building, and that building has a telco tower on top. So that signal boost right here may be coming from there. But anyways, yeah. So basically, you can use this data to select which channels you can avoid in deploying access points. So for instance, I can see that channels 140 up to 161 is very clear. There's not much noise here. So blue on your waterfall graph means it's very clear. If you have like a bit of green tints here, that means that there is a bit of noise that are on the area. Okay, so now I'm seeing a bit of noise here as well. So basically, you just have to judge which channel is best to select to at that given spot where your AP is located. The coverage of the access point or the frequency scanner or the RF analyzer is basically the coverage of your AP. So wherever you have, if your AP detects noise, that means that area where your AP is will most likely be affected by that specific noise as well. So you're gonna have to avoid that channel. Like right now, channels 149 to 161 is very, very noisy from here. Okay, so if you want to know more information about the topics that I just discussed, common questions, I'm seeing a lot of questions, by the way, through Q&A. I'll go over them later on. You can get more information through EnGenius Academy. So EnGenius Academy is our one-stop portal for certifications as well as archive for all the webinars that we have. So not just EnGenius Singapore's webinar, but Europe side as well. So EnGenius Europe, EnGenius US, they have their webinars uploaded there too. So there may be some topics that I have not covered yet from EnGenius SG. So if you go onto the webinar portal, most likely you would see other topics there that may interest you as well. Let me just go over there. You can scan this QR, by the way, if you want to sign up for Academy. It's free to sign up. But let me open a browser to get there. So basically the website is academy.engenius.ai. You would see this home screen where you can sign up. So once you have signed up, you can go to certifications. You can go to certifications where you can access the 3 certifications that we have ongoing. So one is for basic sales information, that we call that ECNS. So this would introduce EnGenius to you guys if you take this certification. And then we have one dedicated for switching as well as dedicated for wireless. So soon we'll be releasing another certification which is dedicated for routing, because we'll be releasing the gateway soon. So all in all, that'll be like 4 certifications which you can take on your time. Apart from the certifications here under Academy, we also have webinars too. So all the upcoming webinars, I think most of you guys signed up here on this page. So if you can see, some webinars here are at our time zone in Asia. That would be from Singapore, some are in Europe, some are in US. So feel free to join any of the webinars here. And then if you missed out some webinars, or let's say it's your first time joining EnGenius Academy, or it's the first time using EnGenius, so you can go over on our archive webinars as well. That'll be through recorded webinars. Here we have all information on different devices that we have, different products. Wireless, that would be access points. We have our switches, cloud managed devices, on-prem device, and the gateway as well. So from here, again, you would see webinars from all regions. That would be from US, Europe, and Singapore too. Okay, so I'll leave the screen on so you can scan the QR if you haven't registered for EnGenius Academy, while I'll go over your questions. We have one question here. If we disable Wi-Fi 6 and 2.4, will this affect Wi-Fi 5 gig? So good thing is you can disable Wi-Fi 6 independently per radio. So if you disable it on 2.4 for compatibility, you can still have it running on 5 gig, so no issue there. Okay, another common question is is EnGenius compatible with iOS? I think what you're asking here is iOS as in iPhone operating system. So if yes, yeah, EnGenius is compatible with any operating system, whether it's Android or iOS or Windows, macOS, any operating system that client devices use. If you experience any issue in connecting, try to update the software first. And if you still continue to experience an issue, you can let us know so we can see what's going on. One question here, does EnGenius support mixed type of devices, Wi-Fi 4, 5A, 6-in-1 SSID? So yeah, we can have that as well. So let's say you enable Let me show you the SSID page. So let's say you're setting up an SSID and you want it to be compatible with all the devices. Basically, all you need to do is enable that SSID, and then on the radio settings, there is an option here. By default, it's disabled to discard legacy equipment. So if you want older clients to connect, you can leave this disabled. But if you want them not to connect, then you can enable that. But for full compatibility, maybe you can disable Wi-Fi 6 and disable this function. But if you're sure that all devices support Wi-Fi 6, you can enable Wi-Fi 6 too. So if you do that on your SSID, basically the SSID would be running Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 4 compatibility, because by default all devices should be compatible with the Wi-Fi 6 radios. One thing to take note of, not all devices support WPA3 right now. Some devices, even if it has a wireless Wi-Fi 6 chipset, the driver may still not be updated to support WPA3. So this is one thing to take note of, especially for smart devices, like for example IP cameras, maybe smart speakers or wireless printers, because these devices are usually not updated by the clients, or not automatically being updated. If they are updated to the latest version of their OS, most likely they would support WPA3. But if you have clients having difficulty connecting to your SSID, you might want to check as well whether you have selected WPA3. For full compatibility, or to be sure as well, you can have it mixed. So you can enable WPA3/WPA2 PSK. What this means is that for devices that support WPA3, it will connect using this encryption, which is the stronger encryption of the two. For devices that do not support WPA3, they would default to the usual WPA2 PSK. So in that situation, you can select either this one to have higher security for other devices, or just downgrade to WPA2. Okay, another question: can a different brand of AP roam to EnGenius APs? Most likely yes, if that third-party brand is using the same wireless or roaming standards. So 802.11r and K are pretty much standards in roaming, so this should apply on all brands. Unless that specific brand is using a proprietary technology for roaming, then it may not work. But for roaming to work, assuming that both brands, EnGenius and the third-party brand, supports 802.11r and K, you have to make sure that the SSID is exactly the same. It's case sensitive as well, and the passcode, the encryption must be the same too between the devices. So same password, same encryption, and same SSID. So that would allow the third-party brand to roam to an EnGenius AP or vice versa. Another question here is with regards to mesh. Does meshing affect performance to 50%? So in general, yeah. Because basically, if you have an access point and you're meshing to another device, your AP would be uploading and downloading at the same time. So it's getting information from another wireless access point, while at the same time sending that same data to a wireless client. So to make it simple, it's doing more processing, which can reduce the AP's performance in half. But if you're using a high-end access point, let's say a Wi-Fi 6 access point with a very high throughput, then you might not feel this effect. Because for instance, if you have an ISP and then maybe your ISP speed is 100 Mbps, and then your access point speed can deliver 1 gig of data rate, then even if your AP's performance is reduced because of mesh, let's say it dropped it to about 500 or 800 Mbps, you still have enough bandwidth to support that ISP speed of 100 Mbps. Okay, another question here is what combination of fast roaming, mesh, and client balancing is less taxing to the AP CPU? It really depends on the usage. So depending on how many clients are connecting and consuming that bandwidth and how much bandwidth is being transferred. But if you enable fast roaming, mesh, and client balancing, it should not really affect that AP that much in terms of processing, especially if you're using a Wi-Fi 6 AP, because our Wi-Fi 6 APs have um, very capable CPUs as well as high RAM as well to have that processing. So there shouldn't be that much issues in terms of enabling this devices. The only thing that you need to worry about is mesh here. This would be the most taxing in terms of the access point here. Is there a maximum number who can be a VIP client? So yeah, there is. So on our EnGenius Cloud, we have VIP clients. Let me maximize the screen now. You can set VIP clients under access control. So you have your block list, which is essentially a blacklist, and then you have your VIP list. What the VIP list does, it actually does two things. First is it can whitelist clients so that they can bypass a captive portal if you have a splash page enabled network. The second thing that the VIP list does is it can bypass L2 isolation for wired clients. So that means if I have, let's say, an SSID, I enabled L2 isolation, my clients cannot access anything from my local network, even my local printer. But what if this SSID, I want L2 isolation so that it can block access to my server, to my NAS, but I want the printer to be accessible. So I can key in the printer's MAC address here under the VIP list, assuming this printer is wired. And then from there, the wireless clients can be able to access that printer, even though L2 isolation is enabled. So VIP list works in two ways. Again, one is to bypass L2 isolation for wired clients, and to bypass captive portal for wireless clients. So you want to bypass captive portals for devices that cannot authenticate through a captive portal. For example, smart devices, smart speakers, smart printers, any smart device that cannot, in which you cannot key in your secondary password if you have a splash page, or you cannot click proceed. So you might want to whitelist those. So the maximum number of devices you can whitelist here or add onto your VIP list is 50 right now. So that would be per organization. For the block list, it's 1,000 MAC addresses. Sorry, hopefully I can finish all of your guys' questions before we run out of time. Next question: is there any setting in load balancing that can be configured when the primary WAN has weak low bandwidth? It will switch to secondary WAN. I think this question is more onto our gateway side. For the gateway questions, maybe I'll entertain this on the next gateway webinar. But for the gateway, we have two options. We have load balancing, and then we have failover as well. But for the specifics, maybe we'll discuss that on the next webinar. Okay, so next one on 2.4 band, by default, maybe it's set to BGN. When you set it to discard ABG, will it allow N connection only? Correct. Yes, that's right. So it will only allow N if you discard ABG. So to get N speed, it has to bond channel. How about channel and DFS works in this scenario? So yeah, DFS as well as auto channel, it still does work even if you have channel bonding. Channel bonding, we call that differently under EnGenius settings. So let me show you guys. So on EnGenius, we call that channel width. If you set it to 40 megahertz for 2.4 or for 5 gig 40 or 80, that would bond the channels together to give you a higher bandwidth. Basically, it combines the channel to give you faster throughput. So even if you set it to 40 here and 80 here for 5 gig, you can still enable the other options such as DCS as well as auto channel. But of course, your channel options may be limited if you select channel bonding. So for example, here if I select 20 megahertz for 5 gig, I have this individual channels I can select. If I set to my channel width to 80 megahertz, so it will combine a set of those frequencies. So for example, 36 to 48 is considered channel 40, 52 to 64, 56, and so on and so forth. When can I enable Spectrum Analyzer? Will the channels change automatically, or it has to be done manually? So Spectrum Analyzer can be seen under our security APs only at the moment. because it has a dedicated scanning radio. So all you need to do is go to the access point page, go to diagnostics, and then from here go to the second tab, which is spectrum. So here it's tagged by the Pro AP. So from there you can activate it right away. So it has to be done manually because this is usually in scanning the spectrum, you have to do it manually. Unless you do DCS, then it does its own scan. Okay, best performance practice, DCS versus DFS. Both those functions operate differently. DFS basically allows you to skip DFS. That's automatic, and that's on the fly. Whereas DCS applies. Wait, let me go to the radio settings. DCS applies this to all individual channels, regardless of your DFS connection. So that means it can switch between channel 36 to channel 165, even without those channels being in DFS. So usually you would use DFS in scenarios wherein you want to avoid DFS. You would use DCS in areas wherein you have high noise or high environments, maybe a commercial area. You're deploying in shopping malls, airport, shopping center, wherein there are a lot of APs, a lot of wireless device that has a lot of noise. So that's where you want to enable DCS. How to resolve if the spectrum shown is very high or very noisy. One way to avoid noise is to lower down your transmit power. Like I mentioned a while ago, the coverage of your spectrum analyzer is basically the coverage of AP. If you lower the transmit power of your AP, that would reduce your signal, but it also would reduce the amount of interference that you can see. I mean, from the access point's point of view. So you might want to balance it out on two things. First is set your transmit power to cover only the area that you want to cover. Don't overlap or don't overextend, because you would subject the AP to noise. So let's say, for example, 15 dBm is more than enough to cover the room or the area that you want to cover. Just set it or leave it at that. If you extend it, you can have more coverage even outside. But then if you don't really need to provide Wi-Fi coverage outside or to the neighbor's side, you can reduce your Wi-Fi coverage to reduce interference as well. If let's say your scan is very, very noisy and there's really not much channels you can select. Spectrum Analyzer will affect surfing experience. It won't affect your surfing experience because it's running on a dedicated radio. So clients who are connected to the other radios 2.4 or 5 gig, which are browsing, would still be able to utilize the Wi-Fi connection without any interruptions. Is there any guide to understand the spectrum analysis? Yeah. So if you need further information in terms of all the features that I have discussed today, you can head over to EnGenius Academy and sign up to one of our certifications. You can also go onto the cloud. I think a lot of clients have missed this as well. So on the cloud, we have this question mark icon from here. And then from there, you can go to user manual. So our user manual have a quick search box here, which you can use to search every function of EnGenius Cloud. For example, spectrum analysis. Which is found under diagnostic tools. So here we have more detail in terms of those specific functions. So yeah, if you need like very, very detailed information on our functions and features, you can utilize the online manual or sign up for our certification courses as well. Okay, another question here is EnGenius AP can eliminate sticky client issue on devices connected to far APs rather than the near AP. So yeah, usually legacy equipment or older devices have the sticky client issue wherein you are moving towards the next available AP, but your client is still there on the older AP that is connected to. So it's still connecting to the AP that's far away. One way to solve this is enable fast roaming if the client supports fast roaming. If not, you can also try to tweak your bitrate on the access point. But I would suggest not tweaking this because this can affect your connection as well. So what the minimum bitrate would do, found under the radio settings, is basically dictate the bitrate at which your client can connect or associate to your device. So for example, I'm very far away from my AP. My data rate right now is 24 Mbps because I'm too far from the AP. If I set my bitrate to 24 Mbps, I would still be able to connect to the AP since that's my minimum bitrate or my minimum threshold. But if my data rate drops to like 18 Mbps or 12 Mbps or 1 Mbps, then I would have no data from the access point. My access point will reject my connection. So minimum bitrate is usually set at 1 Mbps for 2.4, 6 Mbps for 5 gig, for maximum compatibility as well as for maximum connection, even if your clients are sitting at the borderline areas of your AP. Let's say they're very far from your AP. But if you want to reduce the sticky clients, you can use this function as well. Maybe increase the threshold a bit so that the client would be dropped by the access point and that AP would be transferred to the next best AP. You can also use client balancing here in that scenario because the access point will assess the RSSI level of the client device and what access point the original AP can suggest the client can move towards too. But again, client balancing also requires that the client device support the roaming standards. Also, for client balancing, again, when the client is pushed to another AP, depending on the device, it may get a drop on the connection before it can reconnect. So that all depends on what type of device the client is using. What is Wi-Fi 5 2.45 gig data rate in Wi-Fi 6 APs like where was that? Like ECW 230. Okay, so for the Wi-Fi 5's data rate for the Wi-Fi 6 AP, basically it will follow the Wi-Fi 5 standard still. If you go to, just a minute, let me try to find it. If you go to Wikipedia for Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6 page, there is a graph there that would dictate the wireless data rate. So here you can see the maximum data rate that you can attain if you're connecting to 2.4 or 5 gig. So for the Wi-Fi 6 radios, we use 800 nanosecond guard interval. So that means the maximum data rate that you can attain if you're using a 2x2 device. Let's say you're connected to 5 gig and you connect to the Wi-Fi 6 access point is 780 Mbps. So this is what you would get on the ECW 230 if the client device is a Wi-Fi 5 2x2 5 gigahertz device. So assuming that it has the best data rate or the fastest connection. Sorry, let me go back. I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer all the questions today, but I'll try to hasten it a bit. Is that free to sign up? Yeah, EnGenius Academy is free to sign up. So once you head over to the website, you can log in. If you have a partner portal account, you can just specify your partner portal ID, and then you can specify if you are a reseller or a new client as well. Okay, one question here. I think this is pertaining to mesh. Say I have 10 access points, all are connected via cable except for one unit. So mesh still need to be enabled to have that one AP connected to the cluster, correct? So yes, that's correct. So you can enable mesh on that network so that that one AP can mesh or link to your other existing access points. But you can also enable mesh or disable mesh on specific APs too. So let me show you that. So from your access point page, if you expand the AP page right here, there is a checkbox here if you want some of your APs not to have mesh. Let's say to avoid crosstalk between your APs. So let's say you have 10 APs and you're sure that only a specific access point needs to have mesh enabled to link to your other AP. So you can disallow the rest of your APs so that mesh would be disabled there. But the rest of your APs on this specific network would still have mesh enabled. Okay, another question here, is your Wi-Fi 6E access point ready to order? So that would be the ECW 336. So yeah, we have the Wi-Fi 6E available. But please check with your local regional sales or country managers of EnGenius to check local availability, because some countries may still be processing local type approvals or certifications for the wireless regulatory body. So you may check with our local country reps, or if you are a reseller, you can check with our distributors as well, whether the Wi-Fi 6 AP, which is the ECW336, if it's already available. Okay, another question here, is the Wi-Fi spectrum tool only available on secured APs? So at the moment, yes, but we'll be launching access points that does not fall under secured AP but have dedicated scanning radios enabled as well, so that it has this spectrum analysis too. So we'll let you know in the future once we have launched the device. Okay, another question here is MAC randomization. Do you encounter issues with devices using MAC randomizer? So yeah, starting Android 10 and iOS 14, correct me if I'm wrong, all those devices enabled random MACs by default. So that will be on all tablets and mobile phones. What that does is it randomizes the MAC. So this is very difficult in terms of networks wherein they require MAC authentication, or wherein they require MACs to be read by the system. So to circumvent this, we have this option that we call block random MAC connections. So what it will do is, if it detects the Wi-Fi device connecting is using a random MAC, let's say an Apple device or an iPhone or maybe a Windows PC. On Windows, you can enable random MACs as well, but it's disabled by default. So for iOS and Android, sadly, it's enabled by default. So if you're working on a corporate environment and you need the MAC address, the original MAC of the device, the hardware MAC, to be read, you can enable this. What it will do is, when the device connects to the SSID and it's using a random MAC, it would display this page. So access will be denied on the wireless side, and then you can customize the instructions to tell the client how to disable random MAC on their device. So once they have disabled it, then they would be able to connect as usual. Another question here, what's the difference between Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E? So the only difference between these two is that the Wi-Fi 6E would have a dedicated radio for Wi-Fi 6E. So the technology is the same in terms of the features. You would still have BSS coloring, OFDMA, and all the functions that Wi-Fi 6 has. Except that it has another dedicated radio running on a specific frequency. So your AP would have an additional range or a new set of channels that you can select. So that will be 5.9 to 7.0. Depending on the region, some regions can only support 5.9 to 6.4 or the full spectrum. So that would depend on your local regulatory body. But yeah, that's the addition to Wi-Fi 6E. You have an additional spectrum. That means that this spectrum is still new in the market. It's still very clean. It has faster bandwidth as compared to 5 gigahertz or 2.4, and it's cleaner when you deploy. That means if you deploy a Wi-Fi 6E device in a certain area, most likely you're one of the first to deploy that AP, which would have the benefits of having less noise, less interference, faster connection. But do take note that not all countries support Wi-Fi 6E at the moment, and not all mobile phones support it. For example, Samsung, I think it's the 22 Ultra, supports Wi-Fi 6E, but only on certain regions right now. iPhone 14, I think it doesn't support Wi-Fi 6E yet. So if you want to try Wi-Fi 6E, you have to make sure that your device supports it and the region supports it, because even if you have a hardware that supports it, the software may still be locked. But for EnGenius APs, we have it unlocked for countries that support it. Do you have an on-prem controller? We do have the EnSky series. If you want to learn more about that, please do check out our website or contact our resellers or distributors to give you more information about EnGenius EnSky. How many SSIDs can EnGenius Wi-Fi 6E device support? Wi-Fi 6 support? Is there a quick way to do different VLANs and different SSIDs? Right now, we support a maximum of 8 different SSID profiles for EnGenius Cloud. So that would apply on all radios, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6. So that would be here through our SSID list. That means you can enable like 8 SSID profiles here. Is there a quick way to do different VLANs on different SSIDs? So adding different VLANs on the SSID is pretty simple. All you need to do is go into your SSID profile, scroll down under default VLAN, and then change the VLAN as desired. If you're using dynamic VLAN, you can do that through MyPSK. And then, of course, on the switch side, you still have to tag the VLANs too. How many SSID does it support per radio? So per radio, it supports 8 SSID profiles, and you can enable all radios, so 2.4, 5 gig, and 6 gig if your AP supports that. Where can we get information on the effective range of all the AP models and information on the maximum number of devices per model? So you can get the information on the number of client support per radio on the datasheet. You can find that on EnGenius.ai. So just head over to EnGenius.ai. So we have a product page here dedicated to the cloud. You have information on the switches, the APs. If you go to APs, you have a tabulation. If you need more information, you can click one of the models and then select the data sheet so you can get the full info. In terms of effective range, this is very subjective and hard to say because depending on the environment, the range can be changed or modified. But essentially, the higher the transmit power of the device is, the longer the range. So here under the tabulation, you might want to see which has the highest TX power. So that means that has the highest range. But again, it would depend on the environment where you're deploying it. If it's a very noisy environment, then the range could be reduced. If it's a very clean environment, then you have a better range for the connection. Okay, I think I'll go over more questions until about maybe 4:15. I don't want to get all your time as well, so I'll try to answer as much questions as I can. Can the AP update together using Cloud Controller? Yeah. So updates for the cloud is automatic, and you can do this all together as well for all the devices. You can set it up under firmware. So under the firmware, you can set a schedule at which day you want a device to update. So it depends on whether you want to use the beta version or the stable version. We recommend using stable. So from here, let's say I set it at Sunday 2 to 3 a.m. So basically my device would check whether there's an update on this time frame. If there is, then it's going to proceed to update. One thing to take note of, if for example you have a switch, you might want to choose to upgrade the switch first or later, but not at the same time as the APs. Because you might end up having the APs restarting during the upgrade if you're upgrading it at the same time as the switch. So if you have a switch and let's say you have the future gateway, you might want to change it to different timings so they don't upgrade at the same time. How many tries or times can we take to do the exam on EnGenius Academy? So right now you can have a maximum of 3 attempts. If for some reason you have exceeded the number of attempts, you can let us know via email so that we can check what's going on. How about security architecture for privacy? So for cloud, one of the most important things to consider is security and privacy. So we have that information in terms of our data centers, how we deal with privacy, and how we deal with security concerns. So all that information can be found on our white paper. You can find this white paper through our, I think the fastest way is by going through our user manual. From the user manual, you can click on the white paper tab. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm clicking on my screen. Under white papers, the very first topic would be EnGenius Cloud Technology. The next would be EnGenius Cloud Services Data Centers. So here we would have information on security, privacy, and how we handle our operations in terms of our cloud data center. Okay, one question right here is regarding channeling. If the channel is set to 149 to 153, and then you have high utilization in channel 151 from spectrum analysis page, will it change to less utilized channel automatically if DCS has been enabled? So yeah, depending on the region, if you still have channels to select, if you are using 80 megahertz for 5 gig, so basically your AP would switch to a better channel based on what it has detected. So usually the AP would scan or switch channels depending on the noise level, RSSI level, how far it is, your AP is from the source of the noise and all that information. So it's going to process all that data to determine whether it's best to switch to another channel or stick to the current channel that you are on right now. Okay, is your vouchering capable or supporting Gcash online payment? So we have a voucher system on the cloud, but natively we do not support payments through that voucher. Let's say you want to charge your clients for Wi-Fi. Maybe you want to provide 1 hour access for Wi-Fi, and then later on you want to extend 1 hour more. We do not directly support payments, but we can integrate with any third-party user management or hotspot gateway provider that does monetization of Wi-Fi and link that with the EnGenius Cloud. So if you have this requirement, you can let us know from Cloud Intercom, or you can send us an email for your requirement, and then we can suggest vendors to you if we don't have any, let's say, hotspot gateway providers right now. So we can suggest a few to you if you require those. When using mesh, if a client is connected to 2.4, is the data transfer between slave AP? Sorry, let me rephrase that question. I think the question is, when you're using mesh and you're connected to 2.4, will the mesh connection happen on 2.4 or 5 gig? So for the mesh connection, you can select a dedicated radio for mesh, either 2.4 or 5 gig. So most of the time, I would suggest to use 5 gig because of the higher bandwidth it possesses. So basically, if you're using 5 gig as your mesh, you can still use that mesh link to serve clients as well. So if clients are connected to 2.4, it would use that 5 gigahertz mesh link. If your clients are connected to 5 gig, it would still use that 5 gigahertz radio as well. But being 5 gigahertz, you have higher data rate, more bandwidth. So clients on 5 gigahertz would still have the bandwidth that they need. So yeah, but if you select 2.4 as your mesh link, most likely your bandwidth would be how would I say, bottlenecked by the 2.4 gigahertz speed. So unless it's really not possible to deploy Wi-Fi 5 gigahertz on the area, I would suggest you always use 5 gig for your mesh connection. Can EnGenius Wi-Fi 6 support video improved streaming with projectors? So yeah, usually Wi-Fi 6, as compared to the previous generation, have a lot of benefits. One of those benefits is network efficiency. So if you're streaming and maybe you have a lot of data as well, mixed data, maybe VoIP, video streaming, internet traffic, you would have better experience on Wi-Fi 6 as compared to Wi-Fi 5. Because if you try to compare, let's say running multiple types of data on Wi-Fi 5, you would experience that you would have higher latency. So if you have mixed types of data on the network, especially streaming VoIP, I would suggest to go with Wi-Fi 6 to have a more efficient network. How much percent does it affect if you do meshing with multiple APs, let's say 5, and how much AP supports meshing? I think what the question is asking is, what are the limitations for mesh? Like how many APs we recommend to have mesh enabled. So for mesh, if you go to the tooltip right here, we recommend a maximum of 8 access points that are meshed together, and a maximum of 2 hops or less. 2 hops meaning if you have a linear hop, AP to the next AP to the next AP, 2 hops maximum from the source, the one that's wired. And then maximum of 8 access points. Of course, you can go over this. You can have more than that. But do expect that the connection may be a bit slower because all your APs are transferring and uploading and downloading data at the same time. The more mesh links that you have, the more processing your AP will do, and the less bandwidth you would have because it's already shared on all your devices. What is your edge among other brands, especially in terms of your switch models? I would say that one is the cloud functionality. So when you manage switches on the cloud, wait, let me jump to another network which have live switches. So if you navigate to our switch page, you would see how easy it is to configure and modify and monitor the switches as well. So like for example, if you go to the switch settings, immediately you would see which is powered using 1 gig by PoE. What is your uplink port? Now there is one uplink port running 1000. When you go to the details page, you would see information in terms of the VLAN setting, which is very accessible and easily configured, as compared to other brands wherein you require a lot of trainings before you can modify simple settings that you need. I think this is one of our advantage. Another one in terms of function wise is the diagnostic tools. So we have the diagnostic tools in real time. CPU usage, memory usage. If you want to run specific tests on specific sites wherein it's not accessible, you can quickly run that from the AP as well. Let's say from the switch. Let's say for example, ping test, trace route, cable test. If you need to do packet capture, you can do that as well from the system without having to plug anything or set up port mirroring. So that's another advantage of the switch being online and on the cloud too. So easy monitoring, easier management, as well as if you have multiple branches, you can easily reach all those devices or units from one single interface. But if you need more information about that, feel free to reach our local country representatives, our local sales team, so that they could discuss that to you in detail. Sorry guys, I think I can only answer maybe 3 or 5 questions more. So let me go to the next one. Will you be able to activate mesh in one area and... Sorry, let me reread that. Will you be able to activate mesh in one area and normal in the other on the same wireless network? Or is this only for network in total? I think the question is, can you activate mesh in one device and disable it on another on the same network? So yeah, you can do that. You just have to override the settings. After switching to EnGenius EWS 377AP, we have noticed random and yet recurrent connectivity issues with the device. The gets kicked out and struggles to join, but does not seen in all devices or in all router. Where to start troubleshooting? So if you just switch over to a Wi-Fi 6 AP, try to check. First is the coverage, because as I mentioned, Wi-Fi 6 APs tend to have lower transmit power as compared to the previous gen. But in turn, it gives you better connectivity and more efficient network. So you might want to check whether is the AP still the coverage of the AP still enough to cover the original clients that were connected to the other AP. Next thing you want to check is compatibility. Is the client device already updated to the latest OS or driver in terms of the wireless chipset? And then try to check if you are using WPA3. Maybe you can try to lower down to WPA2 first, or WPA3, WPA2 mixed. You can also try to disable Wi-Fi 6 on the 2.4 radio. So you can start from there to check why you have intermittent connections. But supposedly, if let's say everything is updated and everything is compatible, you shouldn't have any of this intermittent issues, unless the area is just very noisy, or you have high interference, which causes this. But if you still experience it, do let our resellers or distributors know so that they can help you as well. How many APs can be connected through mesh? So I think I've covered that already. So 8 maximum. 8 recommended maximum. Does it support AI-driven mesh? Yeah, it does. So the mesh is automatic. It depends on the RSSI, the noise, the best path. So the AP and the system will determine that. Are there any pros to keeping fast roaming disabled? Not that I know of. So for most of the sites, if not all, I would always enable fast roaming so that clients can seamlessly roam from one AP to another. Unless maybe the site have all legacy wireless clients, that fast roaming doesn't really affect them. So if you leave it disabled or enabled, it doesn't really affect them. But yeah, most of the time I would just leave fast roaming enabled. What is Wi-Fi 5 data rate in Wi-Fi 6 APs? I think I've answered that already. How long does DCS take to time? How long does DCS take time to switch channels before clients are reconnected? So DCS is very fast. So once the client determined the channel to select to, it would take roughly about a minute or less for the AP to switch to a different channel. Now, the connection when the client connects back would depend on the client device. If it's very aggressive on the connection, it will just reconnect right away. But if it's like idle, then the client device may take a while before it reconnects to your access points. So it mainly depends on the client device, on how aggressive it is on the reconnection. How much cost? Sorry, where was it? Well, what's the price for the Pro license for 1 and 3 years? So for their license pricing, feel free to approach our distributors so that they can give you, or resellers, so that they could give you full information on their Pro license. We have licensing available for 1 and 3 years, so that applies to switches and access points as well. The access point controller option is dedicated device or 1 AP or only on the cloud. Sorry, I think I missed the question. Okay, so for EnGenius Cloud, the controller is on the cloud itself, basically the cloud service. So any device that you deploy for EnGenius Cloud communicates to our service on the cloud that's hosted on AWS, whether it's a switch, if it's an access point, or the gateway. So the configuration and controls would be through the cloud portal. So that would be cloud.engenius.ai. So we don't have a hardware controller for the cloud, but if you need a hardware controller or on-prem controller, we have the NSky solution. If you need more information on that, you can access our websites or contact our local sales too. What's the unique features that differentiate yours with others? There are a lot. I can't go over to them right now because, sorry, we're running out of time. But if you need more information on all the features that we have, maybe comparison with other brands, please feel free to approach our distributors or sales in charge so that they can give you more information on that. Yeah, I think I can finish all the questions. Is EnGenius Cloud Portal... Is EnGenius Cloud, I think the question here is, does EnGenius Cloud Portal for managing devices has a subscription? So EnGenius Cloud actually have 2 tiers. Let me show you guys. So we have the basic tier and then we have the pro tier for the cloud. By default, all devices newly purchased would come with a 1-year pro license, so you guys can try out our pro features. But I would say this is the tabulation, by the way, on the basic and pro plan. You can find this on engenius.ai. Just head over to products and then licenses. So yeah, as what I was saying, for the basic plan, I would say about 80 to 85% of your deployments the basic plan would be more than enough for them. So there's no limit here on the number of hardware you can manage. It doesn't matter if it's 1,000 or 100,000 or more. But if your clients require the pro functions, maybe you're deploying for a corporate client, enterprise client, or a client that is really a pro user. Maybe they need 10 or more administrators. Maybe they need client timeline and all these functions for EnGenius Cloud. Then they would require to use the pro license. But for the rest of the clients that maybe just needs voucher system, captive portal, splash page, band steering, fast roaming, all the things that you would need for a basic Wi-Fi deployment, so the basic license is more than enough for them. How many VLANs can the AP take? So it depends. For the AP, we have 8 SSID profiles. Each SSID profile can carry 1 static VLAN. But if you enable MyPSK with dynamic VLAN, it doesn't matter how many VLANs you can pass through on the AP. So the system will just push the specific VLAN that you require on that SSID. Can the firmware upgrade be set to manual or disabled on some user? End user might be running business 24/7. Sadly, there is no option to disable firmware upgrades on the cloud because when we upgrade a firmware, usually we have it matched to the cloud portal. So what happens is, if for example we change something on the portal and the access point is still on an older firmware that don't support it, there might be issues that will occur once you try to enable that function. So to avoid those issues, as well as for security concerns as well, we recommend to have a specific date assigned to have the firmware upgrade. It cannot be disabled manually. So basically, just try to select the option that's least obstructive in terms of the client's business. But we have an option to delay the firmware upgrade, so up to 3 weeks. So that's under the firmware upgrade options as well. Okay, last question. Can EnGenius controller manage third-party brands access point? No. EnGenius our EnGenius controller, EnGenius Cloud or on-premise can only manage our brand's access point. But if you have, let's say, a third-party software that can do SNMP management, or maybe you need to manage them through API. So our API is open, and you can use that in terms of doing third-party integration. So for example, you have multiple brands, you have this dedicated software where you all do your monitoring and management. So maybe through API, you can utilize that information in order to configure EnGenius through that third-party software. But third-party APIs on our controllers, it can be managed. Sorry about that. So yeah, I think I went through all your guys' questions. If you have further questions, you can just send us an email, let our salesperson know, or send information or questions through our local resellers or distributors as well, so that they can bridge the question to us and we can reach out to you. So hopefully I've answered all your guys' concerns today. For anything, if you joined in late, again, you can access the recording of this webinar through EnGenius Academy. You can just sign up from there. And if there's nothing else, thank you guys for attending today's session. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thank you.